Millionaire groom defended me when father-in-law shouted, "Gold fiend!" At the engagement dinner, my father-in-law humiliated me in front of everyone. Everyone stopped chewing when I revealed the secret he was hiding. And what I did next made the millionaire get up from the table in shock. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. The Copacabana Palace was resplendent that June night, its lights reflecting off the shore of Rio de Janeiro's, a most famous beach. The main hall, decorated with white orchids and crystals that sparkled under the century-old chandeliers, was hosting the engagement dinner of Julia Moreau and Elias Alves Munier. The impeccable decoration was not just a whim, but a declaration of the power of the Alves Munier family, owners of one of the largest hotel chains in Brazil. Julia, a 32-year-old architect who was born in Recife but had lived in Rio for almost a decade, nervously adjusted the pearl necklace Elias had given her that morning. Her navy blue dress, designed by an up-and-coming Brazilian designer, highlighted her delicate figure and contrasted with her dark skin. Her curly hair, which she usually wore loose, was pulled back in an elegant bun, revealing the sapphire earrings. That had belonged to her grandmother. "Is everything okay, my love?" Elias approached, placing a soft kiss on her shoulder. Tall with his 35 years of life well lived, the heir to the hotel empire wore a smile that melted hearts, but that hid the pressures he carried on his broad shoulders. "Yes, just a little nervous. It's the first time I've met your whole family." "Together," Julia replied, forcing a smile as she watched the guests arrive. The list included not only Elias's extended family, but also important figures from Rio's business community, politicians and celebrities. The engagement was a social event that would certainly be featured on the pages of society magazines the following week. For Julia, who had grown up in a poor neighborhood in Recife and had earned her position through hard work and study, that world still seemed like a distant dream. Donna Cecilia, Elias's mother, approached the couple with her elegant and controlled walk. At 65 years old, she maintained an aristocratic posture, and her hair was impeccably dyed in a shade of blonde that matched her gold jewelry. "Julia, my dear, I hope you're prepared. Anton has arrived," he whispered, referring to the family patriarch. Elias's father and chairman of the hotel chain. Anton Alves Munier was known for his temper and harsh judgment. In their few previous meetings, Julia had felt the weight of his appraising gaze, as if she were constantly being tested. They had never spoken for more than 15 minutes, but she knew that her approval was vital to Elias. "I'll get you a glass of champagne," Elias offered, sensing the tension that had set in. "Don't worry, he'll love you once he gets to know." "You better." Alone for a moment, Julia took a deep breath, observing the room. In the distance, she noticed Beatrice, Elias's younger sister, chatting animatedly with a group of friends. Unlike her brother, Beatrice had always been welcoming, treating Julia like a true friend since their first meeting. "So you are the woman who conquered my son." The deep, penetrating voice made Julia turn around. Anton Alves Munier, in his impeccable suit and with his grey hair meticulously combed back, was staring at her with an expression that mixed curiosity and skepticism. "Mr. Alves Munier, it is a pleasure that we finally have the opportunity to talk," Julia replied, extending her hand, which he shook with a surprising firmness for his 70 years. "Anton, please. After all, we'll be family soon, won't we?" There was something in his tone that made Julia unsure whether it was a statement or a question. "Yes, God willing," he replied, keeping his smile even though he felt his heart racing. Anton watched her for a few moments before continuing. No, Elias has always been impressionable, ever since he was a child. He's always wanted to please everyone, especially beautiful women." Julia felt a blush creep up her neck, but she kept her composure. "Elias is a wonderful man. I'm so lucky to have found him." "Lucky," Anton repeated the word, savoring it as one might taste wine and find an unpleasant note. "Many women would consider it lucky to find a man with my son's social and financial standing." Before Julia could respond, Elias returned with 2 glasses of champagne. "I see you two are finally getting to know each other," he commented, handing 1 glass to Julia and keeping the other for himself. "Yes, we were just starting an interesting conversation about luck and opportunity," Anton replied, without taking his eyes off Julia. At that moment, a waiter announced that dinner would be served. The guests began to make their way to their designated tables, an arrangement carefully planned by Donna Cecilia to ensure the most advantageous social connections. At the main table, in addition to the bride and groom, were seated Anton and Cecilia, Beatrice and her boyfriend Raphael, a renowned plastic surgeon, and Sophia Drummond, Elias's godmother, and one of the country's biggest investors, known for transforming small businesses into empires. "So, Julia, Elias told me that you have a small architecture office," Sophia commented, after the first course was served. A shrimp starter with passion fruit sauce, the chef's specialty. "Yes, I founded the studio 3 years ago, after working in some of the biggest construction companies in Rio. We are a small team, but we are growing," Julia replied with genuine pride. "Interesting, and how did you two meet?" Sophia asked, although Elias had already told the story several times. "It was during the renovation project of the south wing of the Alvis Palace in Ipanema," Elias explained, smiling at the memory. "Julia was hired to redesign the lobby and common areas. I must admit that I was impressed not only by her talent, but by her determination to defend her ideas." "Determination is an admirable quality," Anton commented, his tone suggesting there was more to the words, "especially when you come from less privileged backgrounds." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Cecilia shot her husband a warning look, which he completely ignored. "Dad, Julia transformed that old-fashioned lobby into one of the most praised spaces in the chain," Beatrice intervened, trying to ease the tension. "In fact, Arquitectura and Design magazine did a special article on the project. And bookings are up 30% since the renewal," Elias added, holding Julia's hand under the table. "Impressive numbers," Sophia agreed, studying Julia with new interest. "I've always believed that true talent reveals itself regardless of one's circumstances." Dinner continued with pleasant conversations about politics, the opera season, and the hotel chain's plans to expand into the northeast. Julia participated politely, but she felt Anton's gaze on her with every word she uttered, as if he were waiting for a slip-up, a confirmation of his unspoken suspicions. When dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate trifle with red fruit sauce, Elias toasted their shared future, speaking of the love that united them and the dreams they would build together. His eyes sparkled as he spoke of Julia, and she felt her heart overflow with emotion. For a moment she forgot about the tensions and social differences that hung over them. After dinner, as the guests dispersed into the dining room for coffee, and after dinner drinks, Anton motioned for Elias to follow him to the balcony. Julia stayed behind chatting with Beatrice and some friends, but she couldn't help but glance occasionally at the balcony, where the conversation between father and son seemed intense. "Don't worry," Beatrice said, sensing his uneasiness. "Father has always been overprotective of Elias, ever since he became the official heir after our older brother passed away." "I didn't know you had another brother," Julia commented, surprised by the information. "Gabriel. He was 10 years older than Elias. He died in a helicopter crash when I was only 12, Beatrice explained, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. "Elias never wanted to be Dad's successor, but he had no choice." This revelation shed new light on the family dynamics Julia had been observing. Before she could ask more, Elias returned, visibly tense. "Is everything okay?" she asked, worried. "Yes, just company business," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Shall we walk around a bit? There are people I want you to meet." The night wore on, and despite the smile on her lips, Julia felt a growing uneasiness. As she walked around the room arm in arm with Elias, she couldn't help but notice the looks and whispers that followed them. Rio de Janeiro, with all its natural beauty, was still a city where social divisions remained as solid as Sugarloaf Mountain. "Elias, dear, can we talk for a minute?" Donna Cecilia appeared among the guests, with a worried expression that she tried to disguise under a social smile. "Anton is asking for your presence again." Elias sighed, turning to Julia. "I'm sorry, love. It shouldn't be long." Don't worry, she replied, trying to hide her anxiety. I'll take the opportunity to get some air on the balcony. As Elias walked away, Julia went to the balcony that overlooked Copacabana Beach. The night was mild, with a gentle breeze that carried the characteristic scent of the sea. She leaned against the railing, watching the lights of the shore and taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. The murmur of the waves breaking on the sand, bringing a momentary sense of peace. A stunning view, isn't it? Sophia Drummond's voice pulled Julia out of her thoughts. The investor, known for her business acumen, approached with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to Julia. Yes, it's impossible not to be enchanted, Julia replied, accepting the drink. Even after years of living in Rio, this view still moves me. Sophia studied her for a few moments, with an appraising look that Julia already knew well. It was the same look she received from potential clients when she presented bold projects. You know, Julia, I watch people. It's part of my job. To spot genuine talent, Sophia said, taking a sip of champagne. Elias showed me some of your projects. You have a unique vision. Thank you, Julia replied, surprised by the unexpected compliment. Architecture has always been my passion, ever since I was a child. And how was that path, from Recife to becoming a respected architect in Rio? Julia smiled, remembering her journey. It wasn't easy. My parents are teachers, simple people who always valued education. I got a scholarship to study architecture at the Federal University of Pernambuco, and then did a master's degree here in Rio. I worked in 3 large offices before gathering the courage to open my own. Impressive, Sophia commented, with genuine interest. And now she's about to marry the heir to an empire. Something in Sophia's tone made Julia stiffen. The fact that Elias was rich was never relevant to me. We fell in love working together, sharing ideas, dreams. Relax, dear, Sophia smiled, lightly touching his arm. I'm not implying anything. In fact, I admire women who forge their own path. Not everyone understands that, especially men of Anton's generation. Before Julia could respond, raised voices were heard coming from an adjacent room. With a chill of apprehension, she recognized the voices as those of Elias and Anton. That's exactly what I'm saying, Elias. You're being manipulated. Anton's voice echoed across the balcony, louder than he'd probably intended. This woman obviously saw a social ladder in you. Julia felt the blood run cold in her veins. Sophia placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of silent support. Don't talk about her like that, Father. You haven't even bothered to really get to know her. Elias's voice was filled with a restrained anger that Julia had rarely witnessed. I know the type. Coming from nothing, no connections, no assets, suddenly in love with the richest man who crossed her path. Please, Elias, use your head. Think of the empire we built. The silence that followed was more painful than the words. Julia felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Sophia squeezed her shoulder as if to remind her of her presence. Let's go back inside, Sophia suggested, her voice soft but firm. Don't let him see you shaken. But it was too late. The door to the room opened and Elias came out, followed by Anton. When they saw Julia on the balcony, they both stopped abruptly. Elias's face paled as he realized that she had heard the argument. Julia, he began, but was interrupted by Anton. Well, what a coincidence to find you here listening in on private conversations, the patriarch commented with a cold smile. Or perhaps it is not a coincidence. Mr. Alves Munier, Julia replied, summoning all her dignity. I came to take some air and talk to Sophia. I had no intention of listening to your conversation, but I confess that it is difficult to ignore. Such serious accusations against my character being shouted at the top of my voice. A tense silence fell. Anton's eyes, the same shade of hazel as Elias's, studied her with calculated coldness. Julia held his gaze, refusing to show weakness. Father, this is unacceptable, Elias said finally, standing next to Julia. You have no right to judge my fiancé without knowing her. I know enough, Anton replied, and I have a duty to protect this family's wealth. I will not be the first to see a hard-earned fortune squandered by an... He hesitated, as if choosing the word carefully. Opportunist. The word fell like a stone in the already charged atmosphere. Julia felt a wave of indignation replace her initial shock. Years of fighting for recognition in a world dominated by wealthy men had taught her not to bow down to prejudice. "With all due respect, Mr. Alvis Munier," she began, her voice surprisingly firm, "you know absolutely nothing about me beyond what you have assumed based on my background. If that is enough to form such a harsh judgment, perhaps the problem lies not with me, but with your own insecurities." Anton opened his mouth, clearly surprised by the direct answer, but it was Sophia who spoke. "Anton, I think you owe Julia the opportunity to defend herself properly. Not here, not like this, with half of Rio de Janeiro just a few meters away." The Tay. Patriarch gave Sophia an irritated look, but the respect he had for the investor was evident. After a moment of consideration, he nodded briefly. "Very well. Let's go to the private office. Just the four of us." The small group made their way to a room on the top floor of the hotel, an elegant space with dark wood paneling and panoramic views of the beach. Out of sight and earshot of the guests, Anton poured himself a whiskey before settling into a leather armchair. "I'm listening," he said, gesturing for Julia to speak. "Convince me that you're not with my son out of self-interest." Elias started to protest, but Julia touched his arm, gently silencing him. "I don't need to convince you of anything, Mr. Alvis Munier," she replied calmly. "My love for Elias does not depend on your approval, just as my worth as a person does not depend on your recognition. But out of respect for Elias, I will tell you my story." Julia took a deep breath and began to talk about her childhood in Recife, the daughter of a literature teacher and a history teacher who taught her the value of knowledge and integrity. She talked about her financial difficulties, how she worked as a private tutor to help out at home while she studied. She spoke about the scholarship she had earned with great effort, the sleepless nights spent trying to maintain her academic performance, and her decision to come to Rio in search of opportunities. "When I met Elias, I already had my own small but respected practice. I am proud of what I have built on my own, and I have never ever needed a man to define or support me." As he spoke, he noticed a subtle change in Anton's expression. It wasn't exactly empathy, but there was something, maybe grudging respect, beginning to form. "What about the contract for Alvis Palace? Convenient, isn't it?" he asked, still resistant. "That contract was won through a blind competition where the projects were evaluated without identifying the authors," Elias intervened. "It was Donna Cecilia who chose Julia's project without knowing it was hers. You were in Europe, remember?" Anton frowned, clearly processing this information. Sophia, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. "Anton, if you'll excuse me, I believe we're dealing with a misunderstanding that can be cleared up with a simple check," she said, pulling her tablet out of her bag. "As a member of the network's board of directors, I have access to the records of that competition." With a few taps on the screen, Sophia opened a file and handed it to Anton. "See for yourself. Julia's project was selected from 12 proposals, all anonymous. The decision was unanimous." Anton examined the document, his face an impenetrable mask. After a few minutes, he handed the tablet back to Sophia without comment. "Is there anything else you'd like to know about me?" Julia asked, maintaining her composure despite the tension that still filled the room. The patriarch studied her for a long moment before answering, "Why have you never tried to use your proximity to Elijah to leverage your office? It would be the most obvious route for someone with interests." The question took Julia by surprise, not because of its content, but because it revealed that Anton had indeed investigated her professional life. "Because that would compromise my integrity and my work," she replied without hesitation. "I'd rather grow more slowly, but on my own merit, than owe my success to connections. Besides," she added, allowing herself a small smile, "I've never been very good at taking shortcuts." The silence that followed Julia's words weighed like lead in the office. Anton Alvis Munier seemed to be weighing her every word, like a jeweler examining the authenticity of a precious stone. His eyes, which had previously brimmed with suspicion, now showed a reluctant curiosity. You speak well, he commented finally, twirling the glass of whiskey between his fingers. But words are easy to manipulate. Actions reveal true character. I completely agree, Julia replied, holding the patriarch's gaze, and my actions over the years speak for themselves. Sophia, who had been watching the interaction with analytical interest, intervened. Anton, perhaps we should return to the party. The guests have certainly noticed our prolonged absence. I'm not done yet, he replied, his eyes never leaving Julia's. There is one fundamental issue that has yet to be addressed. Elias visibly tensed beside Julia. Father, that's enough. You're turning our engagement into an interrogation. It's about Victoria, Anton said, ignoring his son's protest. The name fell like a bomb in the room. Elias paled instantly, and Julia felt a chill run down her spine, although she didn't know who Victoria was. That's a low blow, Anton, Sophia protested, dropping her conciliatory tone. Victory has nothing to do with this situation. On the contrary, the patriarch replied, it has everything to do with it. Elijah nearly lost everything because of that woman, and now, less than 2 years later, he announces an engagement to another, with all due respect, Julia, another woman of modest origin and no connections. Julia turned to Elias, confused. Who's Victoria? Elias's discomfort was palpable. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Julia knew well. Victoria Karen, he replied reluctantly. My ex-fiancé. Ex-fiancé? Julia felt like she'd been punched in the gut. You never mentioned you were ever engaged before. Because it was a mistake he'd rather forget, Anton interjected with a humorless smile. Victoria was an ambitious executive Elias met during the expansion into the Northeast. Charming, intelligent, and completely interested in our heritage. Father, please, Elias begged, but Anton remained relentless. 2 months after they announced their engagement, we discovered that she was selling confidential information to our competitors. Elias was so blinded by passion that he refused to believe it until the evidence was irrefutable. Julia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The revelation explained so many things. Anton's excessive distrust, Elias's reluctance to talk about his past, the wary looks he received from some family members. That happened almost 2 years ago, Anton continued. We managed to control the damage, but it cost the company millions and nearly destroyed Elias's reputation on the board. So you understand, Julia, why I'm cautious. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Julia tried to process what she had just heard, while Elias seemed to sink into painful memories. Father, Elias said finally, his voice steady despite the evident tension, Julia is not Victoria, and I am no longer the same naive man I was 2 years ago. And how can I be sure of that, Anton asked. How can I know that we are not repeating the same mistake? It was Sophia who answered, surprising everyone. Because I investigated Julia thoroughly before you even announced your engagement. All eyes turned to the investor. What do you mean? Asked Elias, clearly surprised. Sophia shrugged with studied elegance. Anton asked me, obviously. And before you start protesting, Elias, it's common practice in families like yours. It's nothing personal, Julia. Julia felt a mixture of indignation and relief. On the one hand, the idea of having her life rummaged through without her knowledge was deeply disturbing. On the other, it seemed that the investigation had found nothing compromising, which should work in her favor in this impossible situation. And what did you discover, Sophia? He asked, keeping his voice controlled. Sophia smiled slightly. Nothing. Beyond what you yourself have told us. An impressive track record of hard work and integrity. No significant debts, no suspicious connections, no skeletons in the closet. In fact, she added, casting a meaningful glance at Anton, I discovered something you had left out that particularly impressed me. Julia frowned, trying to imagine what Sophia could be referring to. The Asas da Liberdade Institute, Sophia continued. You founded an NGO that offers professional training to women in vulnerable situations in communities in Rio, right? And you finance a large part of the project with your own resources, even with the financial limitations of a growing office. Elias looked at Julia in astonishment. "You never told me about this." "It's not something I publicize," she replied, embarrassed. "It started as a small project with some architect friends, offering interior design workshops to women in the Itwami favela. It grew organically. According to my research," Sophia continued, "the Institute has trained more than 200 women in the last 3 years, many of whom have found formal employment in the interior design sector. A remarkable initiative for someone supposedly interested only in social advancement." Anton fell silent, absorbing this information. His face, normally so expressive in its disapproval, was now a mask of studied neutrality. "Why did you hide this from Elijah?" he asked finally. Julia took a deep breath before answering. "I didn't hide it, I just didn't mention it. The Institute is something personal, a way to give back for opportunities I've been given. I didn't want Elias to think I was trying to impress him with good deeds." A flash of understanding seemed to cross the patriarch's face. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the night view of the beach for a few moments, lost in thought. "You know, Julia," he said without turning around, "when I met Cecilia, I was nothing more than an ambitious young man with more dreams than money in my pocket." The abrupt change of subject took everyone by surprise. Elias and Sophia exchanged confused glances, while Julia watched the man's rigid back against the panorama of the marvelous city. "Her father, a traditional banker, accused me of the same things I just accused you of," Anton continued, his voice softer now, almost wistful. "He was convinced that I had seduced his daughter out of interest in his connections and fortune." Anton turned slowly, staring at Julia with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Those accusations hurt me deeply because I loved Cecilia for who she was, not for what her family represented. I swore to myself that I would never judge anyone the same way, and yet here I am, repeating the exact same mistake." The silence that followed had a different weight now. It was no longer filled with tension, but with a dawning understanding, still fragile but real. "How did you gain her father's trust?" Julia asked softly. A genuine smile, the first of the night, appeared on Anton's lips. "I didn't win him over. He hated me until the day he left. But Cecilia believed in me, and that was enough." Anton walked over, stopping in front of Julia. "What makes me different from him is that despite my fears, I'm still willing to be proven wrong." "And how can I do that?" Julia asked, feeling like they were finally getting somewhere. "Time," Anton replied simply. "Time reveals all truth sooner or later." Elijah, who had been watching the exchange with growing hope, spoke up. "Father, does this mean—" "It means I'm willing to give it a chance," Anton replied, turning to his son. "But," he added, raising a warning finger, "on one condition." "What condition?" asked Elijah cautiously. "A strict prenuptial agreement," Anton said, reverting to his businesslike tone. "It's non-negotiable." Elias looked like he was about to protest, but Julia interrupted him. "I agree." Everyone looked at her in surprise. "I agree to a prenup," she repeated firmly. "In fact, I was going to suggest one anyway. I have my own assets to protect, modest as they may be, and my financial independence is important to me." Anton studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well, it seems we are finally reaching an understanding." "We should get back to the party," Sophia suggested, discreetly checking her watch. "The guests must be wondering what happened." To the hosts. As they prepared to leave the office, Anton gestured for Julia to stay behind. Elias hesitated, but a look from Julia reassured him, and he left with Sophia, leaving his fiancé and future father-in-law alone. "There's something I need to tell you," Anton said when they were alone. "Something even Elias doesn't fully know." Julia felt a shiver run down her spine at Anton's words. The patriarch's gaze had changed. It was no longer the cold scrutiny of before, but something more complex, a mixture of weariness and vulnerability that she had never expected to see in this man. "What do you want to tell me?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite the apprehension growing in his chest. Anton walked over to the bar and poured himself more whiskey, a gesture that seemed more like a search for time than alcohol. When he finally spoke, His voice was lower, almost confessional. Elias was not born to lead the company. That was the destiny of Gabriel, my firstborn. Julia nodded, remembering what Beatrice had mentioned about her older brother. Beatrice told me about the accident. Accident. Anton repeated the word with a bitter smile. That's how the family prefers to remember it. The truth is more complicated. He took a sip of whiskey before continuing. Gabriel had everything to be my perfect successor, intelligent, charismatic, with a natural instinct for business, but he also had his demons, pressure, expectations, an overly demanding father. Anton paused, and Julia could tell he was struggling with painful memories. The helicopter did not crash due to mechanical failure, as the press reported. Gabriel was under the influence of substances. The internal investigation we conducted confirmed this, but we kept it secret to preserve his memory and the family's reputation. The revelation hit Julia like a punch. Suddenly, many things began to make sense. Anton's overprotectiveness of Elias, the weight that always seemed to follow the family, the sad looks she occasionally caught on Donna Cecilia. Does Elias know about this? Partially. He knows that his brother struggled with addiction, but he doesn't know that it was the direct cause of the accident. I believe he suspects, but we prefer never to confirm. It was a tacit agreement between Cecilia and I. Why are you telling me this? Julia asked softly. Anton took a deep breath before looking at her directly. Because Elias never wanted the empire I built. He took on the responsibility out of duty, not desire. Architecture has always been his passion, something I supported until I realized Gabriel would no longer be here to carry on my legacy. He paused, setting the glass down on the table with deliberate care. Elias is unhappy, Julia. He has been for years, though he tries to hide it from me. And I fear that he will end up following the same path as his brother, suffocated by a fate he did not choose. The vulnerability in Anton's voice was so unexpected that Julia felt her resistance melt away. Behind the facade of the ruthless businessman was a father tormented by the fear of losing another son. When you two started dating, my first instinct was to protect Elias from another possible disaster after the Vittoria case. But Sophia showed me your investigation, and the more I observed you, the more I noticed something that made me even more apprehensive. What? Asked Julia, puzzled. Elias smiles when he's with you. He really smiles like he hasn't in years. And that terrifies me because it means you have power over him. Power to make him happy, but also power to destroy him completely. Julia absorbed the words silently, finally understanding the depth of Anton's fear. Mr. Alvis Munier, he said finally, I love your son. Not for the empire he will inherit, but for the compassionate and creative man he is. And I promise I will do everything in my power to ensure he never feels suffocated or unhappy around me. Anton studied her intently, as if trying to see beyond her words to the truth in her heart. There's one more thing you need to know, he said after a moment, something that might explain why I reacted so strongly to your presence in Elijah's life. He walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound volume. He opened it, revealing a photo album. With careful fingers, he removed an old photo and handed it to Julia. The image showed a young Anton, probably in his early 20s, standing next to a beautiful woman with dark skin and curly hair. Something about the woman's features seemed strangely familiar. This is Teresa, Anton said, his voice soft now. My first love, long before I met Cecilia. Julia looked from the photo to Anton, confused as to why he was sharing that memory. Teresa was from Recife, like you, daughter of a seamstress and a fisherman. We met when I went to the Northeast for a university internship. It was love at first sight, at least for me. Anton seemed to be lost in memory for a moment before continuing. My father, when he found out, did exactly what I did to you today. He accused you of being self-interested, of being with me only for the promise of a comfortable future. And I didn't have the courage that Elias had. What happened? Julia asked softly. I gave in to family pressure. I broke up with Teresa and returned to Rio to take over the family business, as expected. A year later, I met Cecilia at a charity event. She was from a good family, educated in Europe, the perfect match. We got married 6 months later. Anton returned the photo to the album with reverent care. Don't get me wrong, I have grown to love Cecilia deeply over the years. We have built a life and a family that I am so proud of. But sometimes, especially on quieter nights, I still wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen Teresa over my family legacy. Julia then realized why the woman's image seemed familiar. There was something about Teresa that reminded her of herself. The same body type, the same background, maybe even a similar look. When I first saw you with Elias, Anton continued, it was like seeing a ghost from my own past. And my first instinct was to pull you away from what I considered a mistake I myself did not make. You regret not having kept her, Julia said, not as a question but as a statement. It's not that simple, Anton replied with a sigh. If I had chosen Teresa, I wouldn't have Gabriel, Elias and Beatrice. I wouldn't have built the empire I've built. It would be a completely different life, not necessarily better or worse, but certainly more authentic, perhaps. He closed the album and returned it to the shelf. What I'm trying to say, Julia, is that my resistance to you wasn't really about you, but about my own ghosts and regrets. That unexpected confession left Julia speechless. Before her was no longer the fearsome patriarch of the Alvus Munier, but simply a man with scars and regrets, like any other. Thank you for sharing this with me, she said finally. It means a lot to know that you trust me enough to reveal something so personal. Anton nodded slightly. Elias deserves the chance I didn't give myself, and you. He paused as if choosing his words carefully. You deserve to be judged for who you are, not by my fears or prejudices. A comfortable silence settled between them, a mutual understanding that needed no further words. We should head back, Anton finally suggested. I imagine the guests are already speculating about our prolonged absence. As they walked back to the hall, Julia felt something fundamental had changed. The barrier that had existed between her and Elias's family had not completely disappeared, but now there was a gap, an opportunity to build something new. In the hall, Elias was waiting for them with an anxious expression. When he saw Julia's serene expression and his father's more relaxed posture, a visible relief took over his face. Is everything okay? He asked, taking Julia's hand as she approached. Yes, she replied with a soft smile. Your father and I have come to an understanding. Anton cleared his throat slightly, adjusting his tie. Elias, if I may, I would like to propose a toast to the bride and groom. The surprise on Elijah's face was evident, but he quickly composed himself. Anton signaled to a waiter who brought out glasses of champagne for everyone. The patriarch raised his glass, and the entire hall fell silent in anticipation. Today, Anton began, his voice strong and clear, we celebrate not just an engagement, but the beginning of a new phase for our family. Elias has always been a son who has made me proud, with his integrity and sensitivity. And now, he continued, turning to Julia, he presents us with a bride who has demonstrated not only talent and intelligence, but also the courage to stand up for her convictions. Murmurs of approval ran through the room. Donna Cecilia, who was watching the scene from afar, seemed intrigued by her husband's sudden change in attitude. To Julia and Elias, Anton concluded, raising his glass even higher, may you build together a future as solid as the foundations of this family, but with the freedom to chart your own path. To Julia and Elias, echoed the guests, raising their glasses. As everyone toasted, Julia noticed Sophia watching her with an enigmatic smile. The investor discreetly raised her glass in a private toast, as if acknowledging a well-won victory. The rest of the evening passed in a much lighter mood. Beatrice, who had noticed the change in the atmosphere, approached Julia with barely concealed curiosity. What did you tell my father? He asked quietly, as Elijah chatted with some guests. I've never seen him change his mind so quickly about anyone. Julia smiled, thinking about the intimate conversation she had just had. Let's just say we discovered we have more in common than we thought. The morning after the engagement dinner dawned with the typical Rio sun, bright and imposing. Julia woke up in her apartment in Botafogo, a modest but elegant space that reflected her personality. White walls decorated with contemporary Brazilian art, functional designer furniture, and a small balcony from which one could glimpse a piece of Sugarloaf Mountain on clear days like that. As she made her coffee, she thought about the previous night, which had unfolded like an emotional roller coaster. Anton's accusations, the revelation about Victoria, and finally the intimate conversation that had turned an adversary into a potential ally. She was still absorbing it all when her cell phone rang. "Good morning, my love." Elias's voice sounded cheerful on the other end of the line. "How are you feeling after yesterday?" "Still processing," she replied honestly, taking a sip of coffee. "Your father is intense." Elias laughed, a sound that always warmed Julia's heart. "That's an understatement, but I was impressed with the way you stood up to him. Few have that courage." "It wasn't courage, it was necessity," she corrected. "I couldn't let those accusations go unanswered." There was a slight pause before Elias continued. "About Victoria. I'm sorry I never told you. It's not a chapter of my life I'm proud to remember." "I understand why you didn't want to talk about it," Julia replied softly. "But no secrets. From now on, okay? If we're going to build a life together, we need complete honesty." "I completely agree," Elias replied, his voice conveying relief. "In fact, that's what I wanted to talk about. Can we meet for lunch? There's something important I need to tell you." The serious tone sparked a pang of concern in Julia. "Something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. Just important. Meet you at Confeitaria, Colombo at noon." "I'll be there," she promised, intrigued. After hanging up, Julia felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. What could Elias possibly want to discuss that required a face-to-face meeting so soon after their engagement? Trying to push away negative thoughts, she decided to use the morning to work on some pending projects in her office. Estudio Moro Arquitectura occupied a large room in a renovated historic building in downtown Rio. With a team of 5 architects, including Julia, the firm had gained recognition for projects that combined sustainability with references to Brazilian culture. The walls were covered with plants, models, and inspiration boards, creating a creative and welcoming environment. "Finally!" exclaimed Rosa, her partner and friend since college, when Julia walked in. "We were dying of curiosity. How was dinner?" Julia smiled as she saw that the entire team had stopped what they were doing to hear her answer. "It was educational," she replied diplomatically. "Educational? That's a new one," commented Lucas, the youngest of the group. "Did the great Anton Alves Munier give you a lecture on the history of Brazilian hotels?" "Something like that," Julia said, setting her bag down on the table. "But in the end, I think I got your approval, or at least a truce." Rosa, who knew Julia too well to be content with vague answers, pulled her into the small pantry. "Details, please. The uncensored version." For half an hour, Julia recounted the events of the previous night, omitting only Anton's most intimate confidences. "My God, it's like a scene from a soap opera," Rosa exclaimed when she finished. "And this Victoria? Elias never mentioned it?" "Never," Julia confirmed. "And now he wants to meet me for lunch. He says he has something important to tell me." "More secrets?" Rosa asked, arching an eyebrow. "I hope not," Julia sighed. "I've had my share of dramatic revelations for the entire year." The rest of the morning passed quickly between project reviews and a video conference with clients in São Paulo. At 11:30 a.m., Julia left the office and took a taxi to Confeitaria Colombo, the iconic cafe in downtown Rio, famous for its Belle Époque decor and for having been a meeting point for Rio's elite for more than a century. Elias was already waiting for her at one of the tables on the mezzanine, from where she could admire the Belgian mirrors and stained glass windows of the main hall. Dressed casually in linen pants and a light blue shirt, he seemed more relaxed than Julia had expected. "You look beautiful," he commented, standing up to greet her with a kiss. The blue really brings out your eyes." "Thank you," she replied, sitting down. "So, what's the big mystery we need to discuss?" Elias smiled, taking her hand across the table. "Always straight to the point. It's one of the things I love about you." He paused as if gathering his thoughts before continuing. "Last night after you left, I had a long talk with my father." "About me?" Julia asked apprehensively. "Partly, but mostly about me, about the future of the company, and about Gabriel." Julia squeezed his hand lightly, encouraging him to continue. "My father told me things about my brother that I suspected, but we'd never talked about openly," Elias continued. "About the problems he faced, the pressure he felt." Elias paused while the waiter brought water and handed out menus. After they had ordered, he continued. "You know, when Gabriel left, I had just graduated in architecture. I had plans to work in an office in Barcelona. Everything was already arranged. Then suddenly, everything changed. I returned to Rio, took on responsibilities in the company, and abandoned my dreams." There was a note of sadness in his voice that Julia rarely heard. "You never told me about Barcelona." "Because it hurt to remember," he admitted. "But yesterday, for the first time, my father acknowledged that forcing me to follow in his footsteps might not have been the best decision." Julia felt butterflies in her stomach. "What does that mean?" Elias took a deep breath before revealing, "He suggested that I could gradually move away from hotel operations and pursue my true passion, architecture. Working with you, perhaps." The surprise left Julia momentarily speechless. "Work with me, in my office. Have you signed up yet? Do it now, and tell us which city you're following us from." "Not exactly." He proposed creating a new arm of the company, focused on design and architecture, a division that would be responsible not only for the group's hotels, but that could also serve external clients. "And he wants me to lead it." Julia tried to process the information. "That's surprising to say the least. What happened to the empire in need of an heir?" "Beatrice," Elias replied simply. "She's always had more business acumen than I have. In recent years, she's taken on more and more operational responsibilities, and my father has finally realized that she's the natural successor, not me." "And you? How do you feel about all this?" Elias smiled, a genuine smile that lit his eyes. "Freed, like I can finally breathe after years of suffocating." The waiter returned with their dishes, a salad for Julia and a risotto for Elias. They ate in silence for a few moments, Julia still processing the implications of this change. "There is one more thing," Elias said, setting aside his fork. "My father suggested that you might participate in this new venture, not as my fiancé, but as a business partner, with your own practice, maintaining your independence but collaborating on specific projects." Julia felt a mix of emotions, surprise, caution, a twinge of hope. That would be tricky. Mixing. Personal and professional relationships isn't always wise. "I know, and you don't have to decide now, but think of the possibilities, Ju. The resources of the Alvis Munier Group, combined with your vision and talent. We could create something truly transformative. Why would your father propose this? Just yesterday he was accusing me of being a gold digger, and today he wants a business partnership." Elias hesitated before answering. He said he saw something in you that reminded him of himself when he was young, and that it would be a waste of talent not to take advantage of that synergy. Julia remembered her private conversation with Anton, the confidences he had shared about Teresa, the love he had given up to follow family expectations. Was this her way of making amends, giving Elias the chance he himself had not had? "I need to think about it," he said finally. "It's a tempting proposition, but it's also risky. I built my office from scratch, Elias. It's my baby." "I completely understand," he assured her. "And whatever decision you make, I will support you. It doesn't change anything between us." They ended lunch discussing the details of the proposal and other possibilities. As they left the bakery and entered the warm Rio afternoon, Julia felt simultaneously excited and apprehensive about the new horizons that were opening up. I have to get back to the office, she said, checking her watch. We have an important presentation tomorrow, and I have an investor meeting in half an hour, Elias replied. Dinner at my place tonight. We can continue this conversation. Sure, Julia agreed, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. I'll see you later. As she walked back to her office, Julia reflected on how drastically her life had changed in less than 24 hours. From unwanted suspect to potential business partner for the Alves Munier family, the transition was almost absurd in its speed. When she arrived at the office, she found a surprise waiting for her. Sophia Drummond, elegant in a navy blue suit, was chatting animatedly with Rosa at reception. Sophia? I didn't expect to see you here, Julia commented, genuinely surprised. Sorry to show up unannounced, the investor replied with a smile. But after yesterday, I was curious to see more of your work. Your partner kindly showed me some of your projects while you were away. It's an honor to have you here, Julia said, indicating her office for a more private conversation. Once alone, Sophia got straight to the point. I imagine Elias has already told you about Anton's proposal. Yes, we just had lunch. How do you know that? Sophia smiled. Because it was partly my idea. Your idea? Julia repeated, surprised by Sophia's revelation. Why? The investor walked around the office, looking at the projects displayed on the walls with an analytical eye before answering. Because I recognize talent when I see it, and because I've learned over the years that the best deals are those where everyone wins. Sophia stopped in front of a panel showing the revitalization project of an old factory in Porto Maravilha, transformed into a multifunctional cultural space, one of Estúdio Moreau's most awarded works. This project, for example, you have managed to preserve the historic essence of the building while adapting it to contemporary needs. It is exactly this kind of vision that the Alves Munier Group needs. Julia crossed her arms, still skeptical. That doesn't explain why you personally would be interested in this partnership. Sophia smiled, appreciating his candor. I am an investor in 3 companies operating in Porto Maravilha. Since your project was implemented, the value of real estate in the area has increased by 40%. Good architectural designs transform not only spaces, but entire economies. She sat down in the chair across from Julia's desk, adopting a more formal posture. For years I've been suggesting to Anton that he diversify the family business beyond the traditional hotel business. The market is changing rapidly, and those who don't adapt will perish. And I fit into this diversification strategy. How? Perfectly, Sophia replied without hesitation. You bring something the group doesn't have, a contemporary sensibility combined with a deep respect for Brazilian culture. Your projects are not just functional, they are experiences. Sophia paused before adding, plus you obviously have a talent for management. Building a successful architecture firm in Brazil, especially as a woman, is not for everyone. Julia couldn't help but smile at the spot-on comment. You really did your research on me. That's what I do, my dear. I don't invest my time or money in uncertain bets. Something in the way Sophia spoke made Julia realize that there was more to this visit than just a casual conversation. You're not just here to praise my work or talk about Anton's proposal, are you? Sophia smiled, clearly, approving of Julia's insight. No, I'm here to make my own proposal. The investor opened her leather briefcase and took out an elegantly bound dossier, placing it on the table. This is a project I have been developing for 2 years. A multi-purpose complex in Salvador that combines a boutique hotel, cultural spaces, galleries, and studios for resident artists. The concept is to create a creative hub that celebrates Bahia's cultural richness while offering authentic tourist experiences. Julia leafed through the material, impressed by the scope and ambition of the project. This is amazing, Sophia. But what does this have to do with me? I want you to be the lead architect, Sophia replied directly. The entire architectural concept, from the master plan to the interior details. Julia felt her heart race. It was the kind of project every architect dreams of, big, significant, with the potential for real urban transformation. Why me? There are bigger offices with more resources and experience in projects of this scale. Because I saw how you transformed the lobby of the Alvis Palace. You didn't just redesign a space. You created a visual narrative that speaks to Rio's history while looking to the future. That's exactly the approach I want for Salvador. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes shining with genuine enthusiasm. Besides, you understand the cultural nuances, traditions, colors, and textures of Bahia in a way that architects from the Rio-São Paulo axis never fully would. Julia was speechless. The proposal was tempting, a professional dream come true in an unexpected way. That's wow. I don't know what to say, Sophia. My office is too small for a project of this magnitude. Resources can be provided, Sophia replied, with a dismissive gesture. What you can't buy is vision, and you have that in spades. And how does this relate to Anton's proposal? They seem like conflicting projects. Sophia smiled as if she had been expecting that exact question. Not necessarily. In fact, they could be complementary. The architecture and design arm that Anton is proposing could be a partner in this project. It would be an excellent way to inaugurate the new division with a prestigious project. Julia felt a little dizzy at the possibilities unfolding. You planned all this, didn't you? Let's just say I saw an opportunity to align different interests, Sophia replied with an enigmatic smile. Elias could finally pursue his passion. For architecture, you would expand your field of work. Anton would diversify the family business, and I would have the perfect architect for my project in Salvador. As I said, the best deals are those where everyone wins. Julia stood and walked to the window, needing a moment to take it all in. Outside, downtown Rio pulsated with its characteristic energy, people rushing between historic buildings and modern skyscrapers, a contrast that had always fascinated her and inspired her work. It's a lot to process, Sophia, she said, finally turning to the investor. Just yesterday, Anton was accusing me of being a gold digger, and today we're discussing multi-million-dollar partnerships. The speed of this change is disconcerting. Sophia nodded understandingly. I understand your hesitation. But you see, Julia, that's the way business works. Relationships can change quickly when interests converge. Anton is, above all, a practical man. He may not have initially liked the idea of you as a daughter-in-law, but he clearly recognized your professional value. What if I decline? What if I prefer to keep my office independent, to go my own way? Then I will respect your decision, Sophia replied without hesitation. The proposal for the Salvador project remains in any case. It is separate from the family issue. Julia sat back down, feeling the weight of the decisions she would have to make. I need time to think, talk to my team, to Elias. Of course, Sophia agreed, standing up. I don't expect an immediate answer. Just promise me you'll consider it seriously. Opportunities like this are rare. As she accompanied Sophia to the exit, Julia was surprised by one last question from the investor. By the way, do you know the Wings of Freedom Institute? Julia froze for a moment. How do you know about the institute? I did my research, remember? I was actually quite impressed with the initiative. Empowering women from communities through design and architecture is truly transformative. It's a small project, Julia replied modestly. We do what we can with limited resources. Sophia smiled, placing her hand on the doorknob. Maybe not. So limited in the future. I've spoken to some friends who would love to check out the institute, women with some investment capacity. With that, Sophia said goodbye, leaving Julia in a whirlwind of thoughts. Rosa, who had obviously been trying to listen in on the conversation, entered the room as soon as the investor left. What was that? He asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Sophia Drummond came to our office in person? Julia slumped in her chair, still trying to process everything. Rosa, you're not going to believe what just happened. For the next hour, Julia recounted Anton and Sophia's proposals, while Rosa listened with a mixture of amazement and excitement. This is amazing, Ju, she exclaimed when her friend finished. The kind of opportunity architects wait their whole lives for. I know, but it's also scary, Julia admitted. Everything is happening so fast. Yesterday I was the suspicious bride. Today I'm a potential business partner. And that bothers you because I don't want people to think that I'm with Elias out of professional interest. That's exactly what Anton accused me of. Rosa gave an ironic laugh. Ju, you've been with Elias for 3 years, and you've never used that connection to get a single project. If you were self-interested, you would have done it a long time ago. Julia couldn't help but smile at her friend's impeccable logic. You're right, as always. Besides, Rosa continued, the Wings of Freedom Institute could finally grow with the right support. Think of how many more women you could help. That argument touched Julia deeply. The Institute was her most cherished personal project, born from the desire to give back the opportunities she had received in life. I need to talk to Elias about all of this, he concluded, to see how he really feels about this change of direction in his life. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Julia's mind kept returning to the proposals she had received and the possibilities that lay ahead. At 7 o'clock in the evening, she left the office and headed to Elias's apartment in Lagoa, a duplex with a view of Christ the Redeemer that he had personally renovated, one of the few architectural projects he had managed to complete. In recent years, she found him in the kitchen, preparing a risotto while listening to bossa nova. The domestic scene, so far removed from the tension of the previous night's engagement dinner, brought a smile to Julia's lips. That smells wonderful, she commented, hugging him from behind. Elias turned to kiss her. Shrimp risotto with Sicilian lemon and a bottle of white wine is already breathing. How romantic, she smiled. Are we celebrating something special? Our survival of the engagement dinner, he suggested with a mischievous smile, or perhaps the beginning of a new phase for both of us. As they ate dinner on the balcony, with the city lights twinkling around Lagoa Rodrigo de Freitas, Julia told them about Sophia's visit and the proposal for the project in Salvador. This is amazing. Ju, Elias exclaimed, genuinely excited. It's exactly the kind of project you've always dreamed of doing. And potentially the first major project for Alves Munier's new architecture division, she added, watching his reaction carefully. If you really want to go down that road, Elias set his fork aside, his expression becoming more serious. About that, I want you to know that there is no pressure. If you would prefer to keep your office completely independent, I will understand. That's not what concerns me, Julia replied. I'm more interested in whether this change is really what you want, or whether you're just following your father's suggestions again. Elias considered the question for a moment. Fair enough. For years I followed the path my father laid out for me, even when it went against my own wishes. But this is different, Ju. For the first time, I feel like I can reconcile my family's expectations with my own passion. He took a sip of wine before continuing. When Gabriel left, I felt I had no choice but to take his place. It was what everyone expected of me, but I was never happy in that role, never felt authentic. And now? Now I feel like I can finally breathe, he replied, his eyes shining with an excitement Julia rarely saw. Creating an architecture division within the group is not just a concession from my father. It is a chance to transform the company, to bring a fresh vision to a traditional business. Julia smiled, feeling infected by his enthusiasm. You know that if we work together, you'll have to follow my orders from time to time, right? I'm known for being picky about my projects. Elias chuckled, reaching across the table for her hand. I can't wait to see the great Julia Moreau in action. They say she's ruthless when it comes to execution details. Completely ruthless, she confirmed with mock seriousness, especially with privileged architects who have never had to fight for every inch of respect on the construction site. They laughed together, and Julia felt a wave of certainty build in her chest. Maybe this really was the right path, not just for their individual careers, but for their relationship, for the future they would build together. So, we're doing this? Elias asked, his eyes fixed on hers. Professional partnership as well as personal. Julia took a deep breath, considering the implications of her decision one last time. Yes, she finally replied, but on one condition. Which? The asas, Der Libertad Institute needs to be part of this. I want to expand the work, reach more women, create a structured training and market insertion program. Elias smiled broadly. That's not a condition, Jew. It's an excellent business idea. Quality professional training in communities, creating skilled labor. It has enormous potential, including for partnerships with the public sector. Julia felt a pang of pride when she saw that Elias understood not only the social value of the initiative, but also its potential as a sustainable business model. There's one more thing you should know, she said, remembering Anton's revelation. Your father told me about Teresa. Elias frowned in confusion. Teresa? What Teresa? A woman from Recife that he loved in his youth before he met his mother. From what I understand, it was a love that he abandoned due to family pressure, because she didn't belong to the same social circle. My father never mentioned it, Elias replied, genuinely surprised. He was always so secretive about his past. I think he saw in us a second chance for a story he couldn't live, Julia suggested softly. Maybe that's why he changed his mind about me so quickly. Elias was silent for a moment, processing this information. That would explain a lot, he said finally. The way he always seemed to carry a silent regret, even with all his success. He loves you very much, Elias, in his own complicated and controlling way. But he does, and I think he's finally learning to put your happiness above family traditions. Elias reached out to touch Julia's face tenderly. You're incredible, you know. In less than 24 hours, you won over my father, impressed Sophia Drummond, and even managed to turn a family crisis into a business opportunity. Julia laughed, leaning in to kiss him. We don't give up easily, my love. That's the first lesson we learn in the cradle. 3 months later, the terrace of the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro had been transformed. White tents, strategic lighting, and tropical flowers created a sophisticated yet welcoming environment, the perfect backdrop for the sunset, that was beginning to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The occasion was twofold: the official celebration of Julia and Elias's engagement, now with the full blessing of the Alves Munier family, and the launch of Arm Design, Alves, Reinhardt and Moreau Design and Architecture, the new division of the business group, the result of the partnership between the families and Sophia Drummond. I still can't believe we managed to organize everything in such a short time, commented Rosa, now an official partner and project director at ARM, nervously adjusting her emerald green dress. You know how efficient Donna Cecilia is, Julia replied with a smile, watching her future mother-in-law command a team of waiters with the precision of a general. When she decides something is going to happen, the universe simply obeys. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind. After accepting the proposals, events unfolded with surprising speed. Contracts were signed, teams were reorganized, and a new office was rented in a historic building in downtown Rio, which was completely renovated to house Arm Design. The old Moreau studio did not cease to exist. It continued to operate as an independent entity, now under Rosa's primary management, while Julia divided her time between the two spaces. It was a solution that allowed them to maintain the studio's original identity while expanding their horizons with the new company. Nervous? Beatrice asked, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne and handing one to Julia. In recent months, Elias's sister had become an unexpected ally. As the new chief operating officer of the Alves Munier Group, Beatrice had officially taken over many of the responsibilities that had previously fallen on her brother's shoulders, allowing him to focus on the new architecture division. Little, Julia admitted, accepting the drink. It's a lot of exposure all at once. You're doing wonderfully, Beatrice assured. Dad can't stop raving about your presentation to investors last week. I don't think I've ever seen him so impressed. With anyone. Julia smiled, still getting used to this new family dynamic. Over the past few weeks, Anton had become almost a mentor, sharing his expertise in negotiations and business strategy while showing genuine interest in the innovative ideas she brought to the table. Here he comes, Beatrice murmured, indicating with her gaze the arrival of Anton. accompanied by Cecilia and an older couple that Julia did not immediately recognize. "Julia, my dear," Cecilia called, approaching with a warm smile that still surprised the architect, accustomed to the matriarch's initial formality. "I would like to introduce you to Dr. Paulo Mendes and his wife Carmen." Paulo was Anton's professor in college and is a great admirer of his work at Porto Maravilla. Julia greeted the couple, delighted to discover that Dr. Paulo was a renowned urban planner whose books she had studied in college. As they chatted animatedly about urban revitalization projects, Julia noticed Elias entering the terrace, accompanied by Sofia and a group of businessmen from Bahia, potential investors, in the Salvador project. The transformation in Elias over the past few months has been remarkable. Freed from the burden of expectations that did not match his talents and passions, he radiated a confidence and enthusiasm that was contagious. To everyone around him, at arm design meetings, his contributions were brilliant, combining aesthetic sensitivity with a deep understanding of luxury hospitality gained from years of working in the family's hotels. "I'll leave you to socialize," Beatrice said with a wink, walking away to greet other guests while Julia continued her conversation with Dr. Paulo. The event was planned in two parts. First, the Arm Design launch cocktail party, with presentations of the initial projects, including the Salvador Cultural Complex and the renovation of 3 historic hotels of the Alves Munier chain. Then a more intimate dinner to celebrate the engagement, with only family and close friends. As the terrace filled up, Julia recognized faces from the worlds of architecture, construction, the arts, and the press. Sofia had personally curated the guest list, ensuring that key figures from a variety of sectors would be present. "It's time," Elias said, appearing beside Julia and taking her hand. "Ready for the big moment?" Together, they made their way to the small stage set up at one end of the terrace. Anton was already there next to Sofia, both with glasses of champagne in their hands. "Good evening, everyone," Anton began, his booming voice silencing the chatter. "It is with great pleasure that I welcome friends, partners, and collaborators to this special moment. Today we celebrate not only the engagement of my son Elias to the brilliant architect Julia Moreau, but also the birth of a new venture that promises to revolutionize the way we think about hospitality and cultural spaces in Brazil." Anton paused, looking at the couple with evident pride before continuing. Arm Design was born from the union of tradition and innovation, experience and boldness. As many know, the Alves Munier Group has built its reputation in the traditional hotel industry over decades. But times change and we need to evolve. He gestured for Elias and Julia to come closer. "My son Elias has always had a different vision than I do. For years, I confess, this worried me. Today I recognize that this was exactly the vision we needed to renew ourselves." Anton's eyes met Julia's, and there was a genuine warmth in them. And Julia brought not only her extraordinary talent as an architect, but a fresh perspective on how spaces can transform lives and communities. The Wings of Freedom Institute, which will now officially become part of Arm Design, is proof of that. A murmur of approval ran through the audience. In recent months, the Institute's work had gained visibility, especially after Sofia organized a fundraiser that raised enough money to expand the program to 3 new communities. "I now hand over to Sofia Drummond, without whom none of this would be possible," concluded Anton, giving way to the investor. Sofia, elegant in a crisp white suit, smiled at the guests. "I often say that my job is to identify talent and create unlikely connections. Rarely have I been so certain that I was facing a transformative partnership as when I brought together the tradition of Alves Munier and the innovative vision of Julia Moreau." As Sofia detailed Arm Design's initial plans, with a particular focus on the Salvador Cultural Complex, Julia felt a mixture of pride and gratitude. 3 months earlier, she had been being questioned about her intentions. Now she was at the center of a venture that promised not just commercial success, but real social impact. After the formal presentations, as guests walked around the panels, displaying the projects, Julia found a quiet moment near the terrace's balustrade. From there she could admire Sugarloaf Mountain lit up against the night sky, a sight that never failed to move her. "A penny for your thoughts," said a familiar voice behind her. Julia turned to find Donna Cecilia, who joined her in contemplating. "The bay? I was just taking it all in," he replied honestly. "It's almost surreal how things have changed in such a short amount of time." Cecilia smiled, a soft smile that softened the lines on her elegant face. "You know, Julia, when Anton told me about Teresa, I was surprised. Not that she existed. I always knew there had been someone before me, but that he was finally talking about her after all these years." Julia looked at the matriarch in surprise. She hadn't expected Cecilia to bring up that subject. "Our marriage was arranged, essentially," Cecilia continued, her gaze lost in the distance. "Our families had common interests. We were from similar backgrounds. It made sense. The love came later, with time, with children, with shared struggles." She paused before continuing. "But there was always a part of Anton that remained unreachable, a silent regret he carried. I think seeing them, you and Elias, awakened something in him, a second chance somehow." "Mrs. Cecilia, Please, just Cecilia," the matriarch interrupted gently. "What I mean, Julia, is that you have not only won my husband and son over, but you have brought a kind of healing to our family. Elias is finally following his true calling. Beatrice has stepped into the role she always wanted, and Anton seems to have made peace with his past." Touched by the sincerity in Cecilia's words, Julia didn't know how to respond. "Welcome to the family, dear," Cecilia concluded, leaning forward to gently kiss Julia's cheek. "Now, let's get back before they notice our absence. The second part of the celebration is about to begin, and you know how Anton hates delays." The transition to the engagement dinner was seamless. As most of the launch guests took their leave, a smaller group of close family and friends were ushered into a more private area of the terrace where a long table had been set up beneath a canopy of fairy lights. The contrast with their first engagement dinner, just 3 months earlier, could not have been greater. Where there had been tension and distrust, there was now an atmosphere of genuine celebration and acceptance. Julia, sitting between Elias and Anton with her parents, who had arrived from Recife that morning, on the other side of the table, finally felt at home in this new world that was now also hers. "A toast," Anton proposed, rising with his glass. "To the newlyweds, of course, but also to new beginnings and second chances." As everyone raised their glasses, Julia noticed Elias watching her with an expression that mixed love and admiration. "What is it?" he asked softly. "I'm just thinking about how lucky I am," he replied. "Not only that I found you, but that you were strong enough to face all of this and turn it into something positive." Julia smiled, remembering the night when everything had seemed to fall apart, when Anton's accusation had threatened to destroy not only their engagement, but her very dignity. How easy it would have been to simply walk away in outrage, to cut ties with that complicated family, to protect her wounded pride. "It wasn't luck," she replied, lacing her fingers through his. "It was choice. I chose to believe there was more to your family than that first trial, and I chose to fight for what I knew was true: our love, my work, my values." Across the table, Sophia discreetly raised her glass in a silent toast, as if she could hear the conversation. Julia returned the gesture, acknowledging the crucial role the investor had played in the entire transformation. The evening progressed with emotional speeches, laughter, and plans for the future. Julia's father, a retired history teacher, delighted everyone with stories of his daughter's determined childhood, while her mother exchanged recipes from the Northeast with Donna Cecilia, who showed an unexpected interest in regional cuisine. When dessert was served, a sophisticated tapioca pudding with passion fruit sauce, a perfect fusion of culinary traditions, Elias asked for everyone's attention. "I know we've made a lot of toasts tonight," he began, "but there's something I need to say, something I've been holding in for weeks." He turned to Julia, taking her hands in his. "Ever since we met, you have challenged me to be more authentic, more courageous, more true to myself. While everyone else saw me as the heir to the Alves Meunier family, you saw the frustrated architect, the dreamer, the man behind the name. Elijah paused, his eyes shining with suppressed emotion. When my father accused you that night, my first instinct was to protect you, to remove you from that painful situation. But you didn't need protecting. Instead, you faced the situation with a dignity and strength that left me in awe. And in the process, you not only won my family over, you helped heal them. He pulled a small box from his pocket. This isn't the traditional Alvis Munier engagement ring that's already on your finger. This is a special gift I had made to celebrate not only our love, but everything you represent. Inside the box was a beautiful gold bracelet with small Brazilian stones, tourmalines, aquamarines, amethysts, arranged in a pattern that Julia immediately recognized. It was the floor plan of the Instituto Asas da Liberdade, transformed into jewelry, so that you never forget where you came from and the impact your work has on the world, Elias explained, helping her put on the jewelry, and so that I never forget the strength and integrity of the woman I will marry. Silent. Tears ran down Julia's face as she admired the gift, touched by the sensitivity and deep meaning of the gesture. "I love you," he whispered, unable to say more at that moment. Anton, visibly moved, cleared his throat before speaking. "I think I can speak for everyone here when I say that we have witnessed something rare and precious tonight. Not just a celebration of love, but the birth of a true partnership, founded on mutual respect and shared values." He raised his glass once more. "To Julia and Elias, may your path together be as bright as the stars tonight." As everyone toasted, Julia looked around the table, at her parents who had raised her with unwavering values despite their financial limitations, at Rosa, who had believed in her talent from the beginning, at the Alvis Munier family, who had finally welcomed her as one of their own, at Sophia, whose strategic vision had turned a crisis into an opportunity. That night, which had begun as a celebration of professional achievements and an engagement, had transformed into something deeper, an affirmation that true bonds, whether of love, family, or partnership, are built on foundations of authenticity and mutual respect. And as the moon rose over Rio de Janeiro, Julia felt a calm certainty settle in her heart. Challenges would continue to arise, no doubt. Arm design was still a nascent venture. Marriage would bring its own complexities. The integration of such different worlds would require constant adaptation. But now she knew that she would not face these challenges alone. She had by her side not only the man she loved, but a network of people who recognized her worth and supported her dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked softly, noticing her distant gaze. Julia smiled, squeezing his hand. How hasty judgments can sometimes be the beginning of deeper understandings, and how true love is not the kind that never faces obstacles, but the kind that turns them into opportunities for growth. Elias nodded, understanding perfectly. From conflict to understanding, from distrust to partnership. "Exactly," she confirmed, raising her glass one last time. "To our story with all its imperfections and beauties." "To our story," he echoed, sealing the toast with a kiss that promised many chapters yet to come. The more you comment and share, the more we can bring you stories that touch your heart. Leave your name in the comments, and we may include you in one of our next stories, with a special greeting just for you.